Welcome to my studio, everyone. My name is Mark, and I'm an artist and a fountain pen enthusiast. And in this video, we're going to be looking at this pen, the Asvine J16 in the Ebonite finish, from the perspective of an artist who uses pens to make art. Since this pen is made from ebonite, which is a slightly unusual material, I'll first briefly talk about ebonite pens in general before subjecting this pen to my usual series of scientific, rigorous tests. Then I'm going to draw with it and tell you whether it deserves a place in your pen arsenal. Let's get started. Asvine is a relatively new company out of China that is responsible for some of the most talked about fountain pens in the last few years, including the wonderful V200, the P36, the V126, and the V800. Four pens that punch well above their modest price points in build quality and performance. So usually when a new Asvine pen hits the market, it automatically jumps to the front of the list of pens to buy and review. The J16, however, did not, even though it had several very attractive features, a moderate price point, a piston filling mechanism, and best of all, a high quality number 6 Yovo nib and housing unit. The reason I passed on it was that it initially was released in two titanium finishes, one that was shiny and one that was brushed. Neither appealed to me. I have quite a few all-metal pens, but these are mostly pocket pens where the sturdiness and scratch resistance of metal allows the pen to be kept in a pants pocket. Full-size all-metal pens often feel clunky, too heavy, off-balanced, and overly slick to be held comfortably. Then Asvine released this pen in 3 attractive ebonite finishes, and I jumped right away. What can I say? I'm a sucker for ebonite and strongly believe that it's a great material for making a pen. Ebonite is a form of hard vulcanized rubber that was widely used in the golden age of fountain pen manufacturing in the early 1900s before being supplanted by celluloid and then in the second half of the century by modern plastics. The reason ebonite was phased out in pen production is in part due to its higher manufacturing costs, as well as the ability of plastics to come in a much larger variety of finishes, colors, transparency, patterns, etc. However, ebonite is still occasionally used in pen bodies, sometimes decoratively, as we see here in these Opus 88 Coloros, where it's used in the cap and piston knobs, and sometimes for entire pen bodies, such as in this Himalaya V2 made by Fountain Pen Revolution and this Noodler's Boston Safety Pen. I don't want to oversell ebonite as some kind of magical material, because there's quite a bit of praise online that borders on the mystical, claims that it feels warm in the hand, for example, which is not something I can attest to. Ultimately, the greatness of a pen depends much more on the nib and feed, the comfort of the grip section, and the overall balance, rather than the particular material a pen is made from. However, ebonite has two advantages that should not be overlooked. Plastic pens rely on metal parts to make them feel substantial, and without the chunks of metal, an all-plastic pen can feel rather cheap and light. Ebonite, being heavier than plastic, doesn't need metal bits to feel heavy. The question is, of course, how much does a pen's weight matter? As an artist, I'm used to working with a variety of drawing materials, from quills, which are literally as light as a feather, to 4-inch wide brushes that are far heavier than any pen. But there's something about a pen with some weight to it that's comforting, even stabilizing. Being able to feel the pen in the hand has the effect of slowing me down, which is usually good for the way I work. But the main advantage of ebonite is not its weight, which after all can come from metal parts, but its pleasant grippiness. Many plastic and metal pens are highly polished, making them slippery in the hand, especially when your hands are sweaty or oily. A slippery grip section for me is a deal breaker, since it forces me to grip the pen more tightly, leading to hand strain. This is particularly common in pens with metal grip sections, and is why I never buy a metal pen unless I know that the grip section has some kind of textured finish. Ebonite, for some reason, cannot be polished to the same degree of slickness as plastic, and therefore retains a bit of tack, even when held with oily or sweaty fingers. This is an advantage of this material that should not be overlooked. Ebonite also comes with disadvantages. The first is that it's more brittle than modern plastics and it will be more prone to breaking if dropped. Second, these pens can discolor if exposed to direct sunlight for extended periods. But considering that there are tons of old ebonite pens in pristine condition, so long as you don't leave the pen out in the sun or fling it against a wall in frustration, your pen will be just fine for years, if not decades to come. So, to conclude my lukewarm praise of ebonite, this is a historical material that, besides being neat-looking, confers some gentle advantages in terms of grip comfort. Should it be the primary reason to buy a pen? Goodness no, but it's definitely a plus. Now onto my specific review of the Asvine J16. After years of fountain pen use, I've pretty much honed in on what I look for in a pen, and the Asvine J16 checks off many of those boxes. First, this is a mid-size pen, being 15 centimeters capped and 13.3 centimeters uncapped, which puts it in the category of some of my all-time favorite pens, the Pilot A23 and the Opus 88 Coloro. I have favorite pens in a number of different sizes, everything from pocket pens like this Moonman Wankai all the way to the Asvine V800. But more often than not, this is the size I reach for. Why? Because pens of this size just tend to feel right in my hand. In terms of weight, this pen also falls into the Goldilocks zone of being neither too heavy nor too light, coming in at 28.8 grams capped and 17 grams uncapped. Again, comparable to the weight of the Pilot A23, which is a little bit heavier, and the Coloro, which is just a touch lighter. Besides having ideal weight and balance, the pen also features a generously long, tapered grip section, which, because we're dealing with Ebonite, has a gentle tack to it, making it very comfortable to hold. The threads are low profile and polished smooth and don't dig into your fingers. There are only two minor negatives that are by no means deal breakers. First is this little metal ring right behind the ink window, which is a touch sharp. I change grips often when I'm drawing and find myself catching my fingers against it as I move my grip up and down. So this is a source of very mild irritation. The second negative is the posting. The pen does post securely, but very shallowly, making it too long and back heavy at 17.5 centimeters. The cap also sits dangerously on the piston knob and can turn it if you're not careful. Dear manufacturers, if you're going to make a cap that posts, please make it so you can actually use the pen posted. I bought this pen through Amazon for a little under $70, which, relatively speaking, is not a lot to pay for a fountain pen. But it is a lot of money, and one should expect solid build quality in return. And this pen delivers on the details, with a well-polished cap ring, a tight, robust clip, precise cap threads, and a buttery smooth piston action. And since we're talking about the piston filling mechanism, let's get into it. The pen holds a little over 1.5 milliliters of ink, about average for a piston filling pen of this size. It has a small tinted ink window that does a middling job of letting you know how much ink is inside, since you have to hold the pen up to a light to really see what's going on. The pen comes with a useful metal wrench, which allows you to easily unscrew the piston mechanism for a full cleaning. So I'm going to undo the piston knob and then unscrew the mechanism. Just going to allow me to pull everything out and give everything a deep cleaning. One potential issue is that we have metal on Ebonite threading, so this is not something you should do often, but it's good to know that you have the option of opening up the piston mechanism if things get completely gummed up. The piston mechanism is one of my favorite ways to fill a pen. Vacuum fillers do give you more ink capacity, but require a number of attempts to get a full fill, and the act of pushing the plunger down is much more awkward than turning a knob. Furthermore, sometimes you don't want a full fill, and the piston allows you to control exactly how much ink goes into a pen. They do contain more moving parts than a vacuum filler, which will wear out over time, but that'll take years, and in most cases, the only repair needed is a replacement of the rubber or silicone piston. That's of course if the pen is otherwise durable, which in this case remains to be seen. As mentioned, this pen uses a standard number 6 nib and housing made by the German nib maker Jowo. The housing unit unscrews easily, and the nib and feed are not tightly fitted into the housing and pop right out, making everything very easy to clean. Just be careful not to lose the little rubber ring at the end of the housing unit here. While there are plenty of inexpensive pens that use number 6 size nibs, as far as I know at this price point, you'll be hard-pressed to find any that use a number 6 size housing unit. And the advantage of a pen that uses such housing is that it can be easily switched out with a huge range of other fun options. So, for example, Fountain Pen Revolution now sells their excellent Ultraflex nibs fitted with Ebonite feeds in JoWo housing. I can also replace the original nib with this Concord nib, which was custom made by the Toronto Pen Company, or this custom flex nib from fpnibs.com. As I've mentioned several times in my reviews, there are essentially two kinds of useful pens. Pens with well-performing proprietary nibs, such as the Pilot Custom A23, that are designed to work only in that specific pen, and then pens that use a commonly found universal nib size that you can switch out with many other options. This pen falls into the latter category. Okay, let's get to the nitty-gritty and subject this pen to my series of tests and see how it performs. As always, I'm using Strathmore 300 series Bristol paper with a smooth surface and have filled the pen with Noodler's Lexington Gray, which, due to its transparency, allows us to better see how the pen flows. In the consistency test, this pen performed perfectly, putting down a perfectly consistent line in every direction and at every speed. JoWo steel nibs are really the gold standard, and is why they're often used by luxury brands in pens that cost hundreds of dollars. Sometimes these brands claim to hand-tune these nibs, and while that may be true, it seems like they also perform perfectly well right out of the box, because I'm certain that no special tuning was done in this case. In the line variation test, we see that this pen, while by no means a flex nib, allows you to go from an extra fine line to something approaching a medium. Nothing special, but certainly noticeable. It also happens to be a very decent reverse rider, putting down a consistent extra fine line. This is really the main advantage of this JoWo nib over the excellent steel nibs made by Pilot, which are super stiff. This nib rates a solid 2 on my 1 through 10 flex scale, with 1 being a super stiff nail and 10 being a super flex wet noodle. We're not quite in soft nib territory here like the Pilot Falcon, but the flex is noticeable and appreciated. In the feedback test, true to JoWo steel form, there is a pleasant graphite pencil-like resistance to the way the nib glides across the paper. This is a very subjective thing, but for me, this is actually ideal. Perhaps because some of the very first fountain pens I fell in love with had JoWo nibs, and I'm so used to the way they perform. And lastly, in the wetness test, this pen is very much on the dry side, particularly when you work with it lightly. But even when flexed, the lines are relatively dry. This makes this pen great for putting down many layers of crosshatching, which is actually how I prefer to work with JoWo nibs. Now let's do some actual drawing and see how this pen performs in practice. And as I draw, I'll share my thoughts on whether this is a good choice for artists. I've switched over to one of my favorite sketchbooks, the Art Creations sketchbook made by Talens, and I'm still working with Lexington Gray ink, which besides being good for testing, also happens to be great for drawing. First, let me shower praise on the nib. Usually when I buy a pen that uses a number 6 JoWo nib unit, it's because the plan is to use it with a fun specialty nib, a flex or a fude or something else, and more often than not, I switch it out right away without even trying it with the original nib. While I regret nothing, I have to admit that my neglect of the standard number 6 JoWo nib is unjustified, because it's actually a super well-performing, precise drawing tool that gives you fantastic control over your lines. While they're great for artists of any level, they're perfect for just getting started in drawing with fountain pens. First, they're dry writing, so there's less risk of smearing and of the ink pooling up in places where you apply many layers of strokes. They're relatively stiff, so there's not as much risk of putting down too much pressure and damaging the nib. And the feedback will be comfortable for those troglodytes who are used to working with ballpoint pens. And though it's not a flex nib, you can get some very nice, elegant line variation with it. Chinese pen manufacturers have made terrific strides in the build quality of their pen bodies, but when it comes to their nibs, they still lag behind slightly in quality control and general performance. So, while the in-house nibs made by such brands as Hongdian and Asvine are now often excellent, having a JoWo nib remains preferable. This drawing took about a half an hour to do, but even if I was drawing for several hours, I would be fresh and ready to draw with this pen for a few hours more. The weight and balance is perfect, and the gentle tack of the Ebonite is really ideal for grip. My studio is not insulated, and in the hot summer months, my hands can get sweaty, which can make certain pens feel slippery. With Ebonite, that's just not a problem. The pen sits firmly on the fingers, even with a gentle grip. Other than the slightly annoying metal ring behind the ink window, I found that the pen disappeared into my hand, which is really what you want in a tool, for it to become an extension of yourself, something you don't have to think about. Having a pen with ample ink capacity is also part of that disappearing act. Cartridges and converters have their place, but I like the comfort of knowing that there's plenty of ink in the pen and that I can fill it in the morning and draw with it all day without risking running out. Here's the completed drawing. By the way, if you're interested in my drawing instruction, I have plenty of tutorials on my channel, and also have a channel membership program which gives you access to tons of detailed, long-form instructional content. To conclude this review, let me do something new. Give this pen a rating of 1 through 10 based on 7 criteria. The first rating is on performance. In the writing test and the drawing test, this pen performed perfectly exactly as it should, with an excellent precise nib and a buttery smooth piston filling mechanism. So we'll give it a score of 10. In ergonomics, this pen is close to perfect. The only thing knocking off a point was this little sharp ring next to the ink window. But the gentle tack and resistance to wetness and oiliness provided by the Ebonite finish is definitely a plus. I'll give this a 9. In terms of build quality, this pen is very solid, from its dense Ebonite material and metal piston filling mechanism. Though the metal on Ebonite threading in the piston cap could cause wear over time. I'm going to give this a 9. In practicality, this pen uses a super reliable number 6 JoWo nib and has decent ink capacity and great weight and balance that makes it perfect for long drawing sessions. Even if I couldn't switch out the nib, it would still be very useful. But its ability to use so many other nibs makes me suspect that I'll be using this pen quite a lot. I'm giving this pen a 10 here. Ease of cleaning and maintenance is a super important consideration because I often use inks that are waterproof, which can over time potentially gum up the works in a pen. The housing unit here unscrews and the nib and feed pop out easily, so this pen is easy to clean out from the front. But I much prefer pens with a grip section which unscrews from the barrel, since that allows me to flush the nib and feed from the back with something like a bulb syringe, and also get into the barrel from the front. And while the piston mechanism unscrews, this is not something I want to do often since it can put strain on the pen and, with a metal on Ebonite thread, cause wear. Because of these considerations, while I will be putting waterproof ink into this pen, I think this will not be a pen that I'll be switching inks with often. As for maintenance, short term, the piston mechanism might need a reapplication of silicone grease once in a while. As for long term, that remains to be seen. For now, I'll give this pen a 7 in this category. The next category is value, how much I feel the pen is worth the price. At almost $70, this pen is not cheap, but if you're looking for a pen that uses JoWo housing units, you'll be hard-pressed to find something cheaper. These things are highly subjective, but I think for the fit and finish of the pen, the excellent performance of the nib and piston filling mechanism, this pen is a decent deal, though by no means a steal. I'll give this pen an 8 here. And lastly, let's give this pen a rating on appearance. No points can be awarded for originality of design since there are an oceans full of torpedo-shaped pens out there, the Mont Blanc 146, the Pilot 823, and so on. But the swirling blue and turquoise ebonite is an unusual and handsome material, something like a cross between lapis lazuli and malachite, which contrasts fetchingly against the restrained silver furniture, making for an elegantly understated yet striking pen. I think it's positioned in that hard-to-achieve nexus of being attractive without attracting too much attention. This is just nice enough to make for a simple yet memorable gift. I'll give this pen an 8 in the looks department. So, in my brand new rating system, this pen gets an 8.7 out of 10, putting it into the highly recommended category, but not quite among the must-haves. Is this the perfect artist pen? Not quite, but its build quality, versatility, and ergonomics are pretty close to being there, and for the price, you'll be hard-pressed to find something better. I hope you found this review useful, and if you did, please subscribe, enjoy my many other pen reviews, and stay tuned to more. Thank you so much for watching, and see you back in my studio very soon. Bye for now.